A couple of couples and a friend, Michigan State University students taking some time off to go to a rural cabin in Tennessee for what I'm sure would be good, wholesome, clean, collegiate fun. It just so happens that at this cabin there is a recording of the incantations being translated from the ancient Mesopotamian Book of the Dead, the Necronomicon. The utterances going out into the cosmos will summon back the demonic divinities of the long-gone ancient world, the gods below, the forces of darkness. This is the early 1980s. Bruce Campbell as Ash, cultural icon in The Evil Dead. The Evil Dead is a fabulous film. It is a film that is just as fabulous as the later ones will be bad in declining order. My humble opinion. I just am fresh off binging all three of them in a single day, and I happened to watch a couple of them more than once, especially Army of Darkness, the last one, because I had not ever seen it before. I watched it twice. The Evil Dead is, well, it's relatively what appears to be a relatively low-budget film. It could have been made by college art students on their weekend trip to Tennessee. Although it is really well done, nevertheless, you get the sneaking suspicion in the middle of all the grotesqueness that you are looking at the remains of some strawberries and raspberries and some mayonnaise and quite a bit of ketchup and other assorted colors, some of which don't quite come across right, which kind of adds to the feel of it. So maybe they did come across right, and that was the intent. If there were a single word that could sum up this movie, it would be somewhere between a guttural growl and a splat or a spray or a squirt. There's a lot of juiciness in this horror flick, with these people being possessed one by one and their bodies needing to be dismembered in order to prevent the continued assault of the forces of darkness inhabiting them. It's the only film of my knowledge that has ever had the woods come to life and terrorize you, yes, but also someone is actually raped by a tree during the filming of this film, or rather, the telling of this story. There's nothing quite like The Evil Dead to be seemingly so low budget. It is not a complicated plot. It's everything you need for a horror movie plot, and it is interesting. Oh, no, explanation is given why the relative of the young man just happens to be translating the Necronomicon at that cabin, why they have gone missing. There's no explanation given why they would turn it on and listen to it. Like, the whole thing is really sort of thin, and yet horror movies, sometimes it's just kids go camping and there's a serial killer. And it really is interesting because it ties in a very complex concept presented simply that you might get with puzzle boxes and Hellraiser or other things. The idea of summoning ancient long sleeping spirits, these long dead demons that manifest from Mesopotamian mythology or theology, depending on where you come in on that spectrum. Those entities, well, they're historic. There's an epic. There's an ocean of human history and time that these gods below have been feared and or worshipped and venerated under various names by people in various places and times. It's not a simple story of someone who's insane or a madman bent on revenge or just a serial killer who enjoys it. Rather, we get all of the depths of dark Mesopotamian ancient antiquity, but we get it presented to us as simply also as a bunch of kids at a cabin getting ready to do, I'm sure, only wholesome things and getting dastardly, destructive, and vicious things visited upon them. As both a spectacle of splat and juiciness, as a nice, simple horror story with just enough plot to be that gruesomely interesting. The Evil Dead is one of my favorite horror movies of all time. If you're ever in the mood to watch some kids go to a cabin and horrible things happen to them, boy, this is your film. If you don't mind that all the disgusting piles of splatter might be identifiable as things that would otherwise go in your garbage disposal after cutting fruit, then this is your film, because they do such a good job with doing literally more with less, as the saying goes. You really feel like it. Feel like it's real. And even though these effects are relatively primitive, it is hard to eat and watch this stuff go down, even though most of the effects may be food stuff. It's just done really well. The Evil Dead is a classic, brilliant, standalone horror movie, and I want to emphasize that. Because something happens when it becomes a cultural phenomenon, and we get The Evil Dead 2. The Evil Dead 2 has a higher budget, apparently. There's a lot more, what were more modern special effects for this few years after the first one, but some of them it sort of heightens the amount of campiness that it includes in the story. It is a good deal less frightening and more silly, and at times it's hard to tell whether you're looking at a film that intends to be a little bit poking fun at its predecessor, bringing in dark humor, or it's just made really bad and so it becomes humorous. I can't say that I'm sure till this day. But The Evil Dead 2, which I've seen time and again over the years, it just doesn't measure up to the first one. If you enjoy that sort of campy thing, then it might be more your flavor. And it really is, it's a reboot in the parlance of our times, beginning where Ash, the cultural icon, he's become, especially since the TV series and other things that I won't get to because I have not seen. That Ash in the second film is arriving at the cabin for what appears to be the first time with a girl with him. He's visiting this cabin, doesn't own it, not related to the people that do. He's sort of a side story of what develops then around him. And really clearly the events of the first movie didn't happen, or Ash suffered a severe case of amnesia and the cabin has changed hands a few times. It's a very bizarre sort of feeling of, I've seen this movie, but this version isn't as good because the first one was really good and Evil Dead 2 is not. Which brings me finally to the Army of Darkness. Army of Darkness, either it answers the question of, were they trying to be campy? Were they firm yes by taking the entire franchise that direction? Or did they realize that what they had put out was a little too campy and then decided to run with it? Evil Dead 2 ends with Ash being pulled through a portal along with a car with his shotgun, his chainsaw, and a couple of things. Hurled into the distant past, we see what appears to be medieval times, and he manifests, and he's trapped there in the past through a portal thanks to the Necronomicon and the mystical spells of the Book of the Dead. It's an almost Doctor Strange sort of moment. But in Army of Darkness, we meet up with him trapped in what he believes to be around the year 1300, which is a good guess. Apparently in Britain, King Arthur, the synopsis of this one would take a little bit, sort of, kind of. It's extraordinarily campy, it's extraordinarily silly. The grotesque and gruesome monsters that manifest also have weird personalities that make them sort of goofy and silly. And I don't know what to say about it. I have nothing good to say about Army of Darkness as a film. And Beth DeVitz is in it as a love interest. She does a fine job. And even you might notice Patricia Tallman, those that know her from Babylon 5 and even some Star Trek. She has a bit part, and there's a lot of interesting entertainments therein, but Army of Darkness ends up just being really silly and campy, and he's running around with a chainsaw for a hand after cutting off his hand in the previous film, and using his shotgun and building a motorized Mad Max vehicle around 1300. I will say this, the only positive thing I can say about Army of Darkness is they had the guts to completely change genres. They really did. They pushed this in the direction of a sword and sandal Conan the Barbarian versus dark magic movie, except the dark magic is a little more moist and connected with the gruesome, dripping, splattery creatures from the other two films. But coming through the portal and being in the past and dealing with those demons in the past, they really have shifted the whole franchise into something more than what it was, or at least other than what it was, and that's a bold step. I've said this about other films that I've reviewed, noticeably Cocoon. Cocoon was really good. Cocoon 2 was kind of had to happen. You can revisit that review. And they could go on with Cocoon because there's a human going to be born out there in space. But if you did that, it wouldn't feel anything like the other movies. Army of Darkness, they took this from Evil Dead, and the mistakes I feel they made with Evil Dead 2, and they ran with it, and they took it in a whole other direction, and it ends up being a really, really silly sort of film. But overall, it remains a cultural phenomenon. I have not seen the more recent series. I did not see the reboot, but because Ash of the Evil Dead continues to be a thing, he will always be a thing. You have to say that overall, the franchise, this exists as an intellectual property in a time when streaming culture is causing IPs to be bought up by, or various studios to be bought up for their IPs, so that more content can be created for more services. And we certainly have not seen the end of Ash of the Evil Dead any more than we have seen the end of people that still worship the forces of darkness.